I'm conscious we are running over time.
Chair Matt's just disappeared.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, good morning. Good morning, councillors. Good morning, officers. Welcome to this session of Economic Development Select Committee. So if we go, perhaps if we do have a brief run around in terms of who's here before we go into the agenda items as scheduled. So I'm Councillor Paul Pavia. I'm chair of this select committee.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Mark Hand, Head of Planning, Housing and Place Shaping.
Cass Fallon, Head of Enterprise and Community Development.
Jez Becker, Committee Member.
David Dovey, Councillor for Larkfield, St Kingsmount Ward in Chepstow.
Armand Watts, Fillmore Member.
Matt Feakins, Member for Monmouth.
Richard Roden, Member for Monmouth and Committee Member.
Okay, thank you very much. If we go in then to agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Do you have any apologies, Richard?
No apologies, Chair.
Okay. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations at this stage? No. Okay. If they're obviously as we move through the agenda and a declaration does occur to yourselves, you have the relevant forms on the on your desks in front of you. You could just fill them in and hand them to Richard on when you leave. Agenda item 3, to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Are we happy to move these on block? Yeah. Councillor Davis to move and Councillor Feakins second. Thanks as well, Councillor Dovey. We move them. Agenda item 4 then is the public open forum. I don't believe there's anyone from the public to take up that offer this morning. Agenda item 5, the sale of County Hall. I know, having spoken to officers, there's going to be a slight delay in the member for an officer coming from Tovine. I think Ben and the gentleman are going to co-present. So if we move to agenda item 6, local development plan review, would everyone be content with that? Sure. Yeah. Okay. We move on to that item then. Mark, are you happy to lead us on this? Thank you.
Many thanks, Chair. As you'll probably see from your other papers in circulation at the moment, there's a report coming to Council on Monday, which is seeking Council approval for commencing work on a new LDP and various other bits. Part of the background to that is the review of the LDP, which is us looking at the plan in its entirety to see the extent to which it's delivering on its objectives, strategy and the like. We presented a draft review report to an all-member seminar on the 30th of November, and we had agreement from Cabinet to go out to consultation on that. When we did the all-member seminar, the request was that we brought the consultation replies back to this committee for your information. So that's the purpose of this report. I mean, really, the main conclusions from it will be something that's discussed and debated on Monday. But the purpose of this is just to go through what people have said back to us. So a high-level summary is provided in paragraph 3.5 to the 5 questions that we asked, although there were various other comments made that we've woven into our conclusions as well. The short version is our feeling as officers was that we need to revise the plan in its entirety and do a wholly new plan. The feedback from the Welsh Government has been that there's some issues in the draft review report we needed to consider further, especially around joint working, which we've done. So that's in the papers that are coming to Council. And also previous advice that they wouldn't support us doing a short form revision. So if I go back a step, essentially having done the review of the LDP, there were 3 options really, one of which is do nothing. One is what we call a short form revision, and the other one is a full revision. So the full revision is the option we're recommending to council, but that's essentially a brand new LDP. Everything's up for reconsideration. Levels of growth, the strategy, where growth goes, policies within the plan, everything. The middle version is a short form revision, and that would be a targeted revision of the plan. So in particular, our work's identified and the consultations identified the main issue is around housing delivery. Most of the rest of the plan's working. There are bits that could do with tweaks, but in itself it's not fundamentally problematic. We take the opportunity of any revision to tidy all that up and amend that. But if we just went for a short form revision, Chair, we'd be looking primarily at the housing sites. We would, at the point of adopting that new plan, we would have to have a 10-year life. So a short form revision would mean carrying on the existing plan strategy and growth aspirations extended forwards 10 years, so till about 2031. That's what that would look like. It isn't just a case of a really short-term fix, carry on until 2021. We're talking the current plan extended. In terms of the consultation responses, we asked 5 questions. So the first question was, do you consider the main issues have been addressed in the LDP review? We had not quite an even split, but we had 18 respondents agree, 12 disagree, 5 neither. In total, we had 60 respondents, but some people answered some questions, not others. Some people didn't really answer the 5 questions; they just provided comments at the end. In summary, we've said there, a high level appraisal of what people have said, but really those people who disagreed were picking up on comments that we felt either were covered in the review or should be covered, around infrastructure, the impact of Severn Bridge tolls. So we've made tweaks to the final review report, but none of that sort of fundamentally changes our position. Nothing particularly new was raised. It's more the way they were looking at it, whether they thought we considered it enough or it was something extra. So where necessary, we've strengthened the comments in the review report or added bits in. The second question was around if people agree the existing LDP visions, issues and objectives are relevant still going forwards for a revised plan. 15 respondents agreed, 5 disagreed, 13 were neither agreeing or disagreeing. Again, those who disagreed didn't generally disagree with the relevance of the existing vision, objectives and issues. They were more saying that if we're looking at a new plan going further for an extended period, they need to just be reconsidered in the context of that. So looking again at what is the strategy for the plan, what is our aspiration for the future, all of that needs to be looked at in that new context. And we'd absolutely agree with that. A natural part of that thought and decision-making process of doing a new plan will be to revise those, consult on those. Although I would mention that to a large extent, the vision, issues and objectives really are going to parallel what's already identified through the wellbeing, local wellbeing plan and the consultation that happens on that. But that is part of the work that would happen anyway going forwards. Third question was if we agree with that the LDP spatial strategy is functioning effectively. A very different split on this one. 6 respondents agreed, 17 disagreed. So a lot of people flagging up the issue with housing sites coming forwards primarily, and the issues of the 5-year housing land supply. I'll come back to who replied in a minute because that is of relevance to give it a bit of context. Question 4 is around the findings of the LDP policy review, whether people agree or disagree. Almost an even split here with people agreeing or disagreeing. On the whole, those who were disagreeing were commenting on quite a lot of detail, which is a debate to be had at a future stage. So if we're doing a revision of the plan, discussions about what policies are in or what exactly they say, that's all stuff we consider in the future. So there's a couple of people commenting on a flooding policy. That's all the kind of thing we'll be discussing in detail in due course. So that actual detail level of discussion, which needs to be had, would happen naturally in the future. The 5th question then to wrap up is around do respondents agree the LDP needs to be revised, and if so, short form or full revision? 11 said short form revision, 28 said full revision. It is worth me mentioning in terms of the 60 respondents, they fell, probably unsurprisingly, into two main categories. There were some people who were largely opposed to growth and thought a new LDP would be a reason for more housing development or other development, which they didn't think should happen. Or the bulk of replies were from developers or landowners who were promoting their sites. Several fairly openly saying, we think the strategy is too focused on the main towns. By the way, I've got this site on a village. Will you consider this? All of that being very premature. But we're not naive enough to think that, different people replying had quite different biases and quite different objectives of what they want the outcome to be. So we need to draw all that back, for the discussion on Monday to what's the outcome we're after. Do we need to look at the plan as a whole in its entirety and do a completely new plan? Can we just amend the housing part perhaps and do a short form revision? Our advice is not. I've glossed over for the moment the do nothing option. Technically it is an option, but I think the reality is it's not a workable option for us. Even if we thought the LDP was the best thing since sliced bread, it expires in 2021 and we need to think about what we do after 2021 anyway. And now's the time to start doing that. So, Chair, there's the high-level overview of the consultation responses. There is a link to a detailed summary, although when I tried clicking on it just now, it didn't work. So I can forward that on to you if for some reason that link has broken and you haven't had a chance to see it. Apologies for that. But that's probably all I need to say for now, unless there's questions or further clarification members seek.
Thanks, Mark, and obviously appreciate you bringing back the consultation responses for further scrutiny here before we meet as a full council on Monday. Do anyone, colleagues, have any questions, observations? LDP, yeah, Councillor Becker.
Given the bias in the responses, do you think that that method of consultation was actually useful to us or not?
Is that yours a related question, Councillor? Or shall I answer the first one?
Yeah.
Shall I answer the first one then, or do you want me to take a few at once? I don't mind.
Are you happy to? Yeah, okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if you answer that.
I think the method of consultation, this is something we look at in a separate report the Council's considering, which is the community involvement scheme, which is part of the delivery agreements. One of the challenges I think we always face, and I think I'm quoted as saying in Democratic Services Committee last week, we quite often hear from two groups, those opposed to development and the people with a vested interest, developers or landowners who want it. There's those hard to reach groups that are quite often bandied around. So we mentioned in that report, in that document, gypsies and travellers, disabled people, older people's groups. But there's also a really significant proportion of people who are either a silent majority, generally happy, or disengaged. But other people we really want to hear from. So small and medium enterprises, we generally don't hear much at all in terms of employment. It always tends to be about housing. But the employment growth or needs is really important. Our economy's got an awful lot of, well, I say an awful lot, a great lot of small and medium enterprises. So we need to try and engage with them and make sure we're delivering what they need. Other things like people on the affordable housing waiting list, or people, currently living with their parents because they can't get on the housing ladder, trying to find ways of engaging with them and find out, is there a voice that actually wants some level of growth or needs some level of growth? How does that benefit them? So that we hear it in the round. The method of consultation, we need to think about what we're doing. I'm not quite sure what we would have done differently on this part. The difficulty is getting people engaged when it's at this high level. When we're talking about growth options, the strategy, typically the communities get involved when we're at the stage of looking at sites near their home or on their village, on their town. Trying to get people engaged at the earliest stage would be great. We haven't quite cracked that. So we need to work on how we're engaging or trying to engage, but obviously that's our part. Whether or not people take up that offer is down to them. We have got other things like social media we can use to an extent to hopefully widen the message, which probably didn't exist to the scale they do when we did the last plan. But again, we appreciate there's only so many people looking at Twitter or Facebook. We need to try and broaden that as well. So I think the method of consultation on this, was, essentially as good as it could have been. There are a group of people on our database, 400 and something, who have asked to be kept informed on all things LDP. So we went out deliberately to them, and then there's a whole load of other groups that we have to go to, town and community councils and other statutory consultees. So we've cast the net as wide as we can. But I think part of the challenge, probably there's not much interest from some people in this actual topic. When we get on to the start of the next LDP, if that's council's decision, there'll be more interest. And we need to get in as much involvement at that earlier stage as we can. So it isn't all suddenly at the very end, from planning committee, people object to an actual planning application when it's already in the plan, and we should have got that engagement far earlier if we could have.
Just a very quick one. In that list of people that you reach out to when doing that kind of consultation, do you go through Gavo or anybody like that to look at the groups that represent disabled people and try and get their engagement?
No, I think it's fair to say we haven't on that. In the community involvement scheme, I keep getting the initials wrong. In the community involvement scheme, it sets out the groups that we do engage with. I'm trying to remember from memory if Gavo's in there. I don't think it is. We can look at that.
Councillor Watts?
Yeah, Chair, I'm not. Are we going to in some way debate some of the detail about strategic kind of moves on, within the LDP, or are we just basically debating what's in front of us? And what I don't want to go off on a tangent before other members, jump on me and think, this is like a conversation we'd have privately or something. But it's just interesting if I can start engaging in. So, for example, you talk about consultation, but 2 years ago, 18 months ago, I think that the local authority went out and brought in a Cardiff University professor, and he told them, I'm sure they paid a lot of money for it and got a report like that, but there was one thing and one thing only that was important to the authority, and that was to retain our young people. So as far as engagement is concerned, what are we? There you go. Yeah. There's an omen, isn't there? What do we do to engage the parents of these young people, people like us, really, parents that children go to local schools, about their perspective on it? Because let's face it, the affordability of housing is just not realistic. I think the price of property to earnings was when we did this was something like, I don't know, but it was disproportionately higher than anywhere else in Wales. I can't remember the stat. You'll probably be able to tell me in a minute. And and that was 2 years ago. I'm assuming after the Severn Bridge toll reduction kicks in, we'll be closer to something like Chelsea and Kensington as far as proportion of salary to house price, whatever that stat is. So, are we going to produce, or are you attempting to enter or open up a debate about the future of housing that is seriously going to look at providing provision for our children? Yeah, and I want to know, if you are, how are you doing it?
Yeah, I think it's fair. You're looking to scrutinise the process, in terms of consultation. I think that's absolutely fair on that.
Yeah. So there are examples of everybody looks at. We all read the newspapers. So there are examples of best practice across the country. I think Sheffield, Bristol being the more obvious one, and it impacts on us. I think that's really interesting. They've set up a separate social enterprise type company where they've invested, I think it's £175 million worth of or will do, into that specific company to build or form a model of social housing that meets obviously their future predictions. And I just wondered if we could look at that, and are we looking at that? And if so, what model are we looking at?
Chair, we haven't got into actually looking at models or that kind of thing yet, but certainly looking at our demography and those challenges we're very aware of. It's very clear from data we already have. I mean, you've talked in similar meetings to this before about the increasing proportion of our older population, over 65s and over 85s, but also that gap in the 20s to 40s. And if you look at the graph, which we have got, compared to the Cardiff Capital Region, we've got a real shortfall, lower proportion of that age group. So linked in with the Future Monmouthshire work, we're asking that question, why is that? The answer, I imagine, is that people literally just can't afford a house here, so they have to move out. Some of it might be lifestyle choice. I might prefer to go and live in Newport, Cardiff, Cwmbran, Bristol, somewhere else, or go off to uni and not come back. But if it's because they can't stay here, but they'd like to because of affordability, because of jobs, then that's something that we need to look at. Can and should we be tackling that? Personally, I'd say if it is something we can tackle, then we should be. But it is a discussion for members to have going forward, looking at growth. It links in with the growth because the main way we get affordable housing is via market house builders. So if we want more affordable, we'll need more market housing, and that links into the growth strategy and how those things do work out. And then we're into discussions about infrastructure and all of that supporting work. Engaging, which is probably the main part of your question, there's a few groups listed in the community involvement scheme that we're looking to work with. And again, I've completely forgotten the name of one, and I was trying to look it up now. It's Engage to something that works with young people throughout the county. It's an established group. Engage to Change. But again, in democratic services, this query came up about young people, and we are looking at going into schools, trying to link in some of this work with the curriculum around, I don't know, geography or sociology, and talk to them about growth. What are their aspirations for the county? Would they like to stay? How can that happen? And have those discussions through that. So yeah, that's certainly something we want to do. Looking at the models of how we deliver the housing, again, there's separate discussions to the LDP about, do we start building housing ourselves? How do we deliver housing in a slightly different way? One of the challenges with the current LDP is our reliance on strategic sites. As soon as you're over about 150 houses, you're in the ballpark of 5 PLCs that operate in this part of Wales. So, we need to look at, they have a role to play without doubt, but how do we get other players in the market? The tolls might help with that in themselves. People might start coming across from building in England and build here, because there are a lot of developers in England that don't operate this side of the border. So we need to look at why. There's smaller builders who will look at smaller sites. The RSLs are changing the way they work. The registered social landlords. So Mellin and MHA and Pobble are all now building schemes in their own right through things like Now Your Home. So they'll do market housing and affordable. So that's bringing another builder into the market, if you like. So we need to look at all of that, absolutely. We haven't got to the point of looking at models of doing it differently, but that's part of the work we need to do.
Come back on that. Sorry, Councillor, can you just put your microphone on?
Yeah, sorry, I flicked it twice there. So that is specifically what I'm really, really interested in is potentially then providing options for councillors to make a decision about how we go forward, looking at various models. And unless we attack, we haven't got a choice. I don't think we've got a choice other than really getting it right this time, because if you don't, you can say goodbye to the next generation. Staying in, and we talk about this. We talk about the infrastructure, about the schools, and all the rest of it. It's all rather painful, and yet ironically, it galvanises solidarity with people from different political parties. There is a consensus about particularly what needs to be done in the south, because it transcends all those little prejudices that we might have. But we have to get it right. And we have to look at these models, and we have to look at why these models have been set up and why they're working, and whether or not that translates to, or whether or not we can copy that. So, it's something I'll be arguing on Monday, and, for the rest of how long is this process going to go on for? How many years?
The delivery agreement sets out the timetable. We need to have the plan in place as close to the end of 2021 as we can. We're pushing it, but we think we can get it in by about March 2022. It is a tight timetable, and we're trying to balance not having a big gap with getting this community engagement and the actual models and things behind the plan right, which is no mean feat. But that's the kind of timescale we're looking at. In terms of work, looking at things like the strategy and growth options, that kicks off within a couple of months, and hopefully have decisions on that within a year.
Yeah, I'm really mindful of hogging the debate now, but is there any way that we could engage with parents through schools so we broaden this out so it makes the whole process a lot more democratic, so we get a real feel for it? I suspect that, because it would be interesting, people have ideas, when I go to school, and you'll chat about these kind of issues, and people do have ideas. It's interesting that it's from their perspective, particularly those people that commute back and forth. Anyway, I don't want to hog it. I'm sorry.
Councillor Davis?
I can't follow that. No, I mean, I think, Mark, as a member of the planning committee, and you did a presentation on where we were as far as the targets and what we were actually achieving, it was recognised that we weren't reaching those targets, for not attaching blame because of the issues that there are. I have read the full report, and there is an admission perhaps there was an over-reliance on those strategic sites. I think something like the Portskewett site with Melin is the sort of strategy that we can employ, but there must be many others as well, because one thing is obvious, that housing is essential for this county in terms of its future. I almost said strong and stable then, but I strong and vibrant communities. If we're going to have strong and vibrant communities, it's essential that we have the housing. I mean, an affordable housing, we're just not anywhere near our targets on that. And social housing, I'm not sure where we are with those, to be honest. But everybody, I think, on this council would agree that we really need to have a new, fresh look at it. I totally agree with the recommendations in the report. We should do it on our own. It's our county. I don't think regional working is going to work in that context at all. But I keep hearing the words from you about we are going to look at it. And I think the more opinion we can get into that from other people, and the more research we do about what other people are doing, the better, because we're going to have to think outside of the normal box. And would you agree that, there's going to be a period really when we need to do our research before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of reviewing and putting out a new LDP, because something needs to be done on the housing and on the business side of how we attract people to Monmouthshire. Thank you.
Respond to that, Mark?
Yeah, Chair, absolutely, I agree. The plan has to be evidence-based anyway. When I say we, I mean sort of the royal we, us as a council. I mean, really, it's your plan. We're doing the background work for it, but we take ownership of it as well. So I don't mean a couple of officers in a dark room somewhere. We've absolutely got to go through loads of discussion around the strategies on this and the different options and what works best. I'm probably straying off piece slightly, but one of the discussions I've been having with Cabinet member is the benefits potentially of having some kind of member steering group, or taking chunks of the plan, aspects of the plan through, I don't know, an existing select committee or some kind of new group, to get that engagement and get those viewpoints from yourselves. I think that would help us. There's probably a bit of a feeling with us, and maybe with yourselves, that with the previous plan there were key bits taken to Cabinet and then really big decisions came to Council, and maybe members didn't feel they were as wholly engaged as they wanted or could have been. So if that works, I'm really conscious that you've got hundreds of committees already, so I don't know quite how it best works, but I think there's a lot of merit in having some kind of steering group that we can bring those key points to and have a discussion around, especially at the early stages, those strategies. What are the right options? If we do that, what does that look like? If we don't do that, what happens? And have those proper discussions as detailed as we can.
Thank you for that. I would say that a steering group, not only for the housing element, but also the business element, is essential, because I think this is two subjects where perhaps the council is united in recognising that action needs to be taken. And there are some people here who have a lot of experience in various things, and Councillor Dovey, who spent many years and knows the history of many of these things. I think it's essential that we don't circumnavigate the members, that they have their opportunity, and that there perhaps needs to be a group set up of people with suitable experience who can push this in the right direction, because it's essential for all of us. I think that's what happens. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Devi?
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief one. We've talked over the past minutes about what is happening within South East Monmouthshire, and I thought perhaps I could give you just a small snapshot of what's happening in my ward, and I say my ward because I guess Armand would agree as well that my ward is the commuter ward for Chepstow in many ways. And this is within the past month. I've got my first £500,000 house up for sale and I believe sold in St. Lawrence ward. And opposite me, a house, a 4-bedroom house was put up for sale. It not a very good state, but it's still a substantial house and should be a good house. And that was bought, and a gang of builders have been in it 3 weeks, refurbished the whole thing, painted it inside and out, done the gardens, the whole lot is back on the market. Now, I'm not actually sure of the price of that, but somebody has seen housing in Chepstow as a good way of making some money at the moment. So really what I'm trying to say is we're all talking about the impact the bridge will have when the toll comes up. It's happening now. You don't have to wait. There are people jumping in relatively quickly and not waiting for that. So I think we have to get our running shoes on and get up to date with this.
Do you want to respond to that, Mark?
Yeah, only to reiterate some of that. Absolutely agree. We can already see in some of the impacts of the bridges. I'd urge a bit of caution about the stats in a way, because at the moment there's so few homes on the market. The sale of one £500,000 house can quite significantly skew the figures. But a bit of research that Shirley Wigham's done shows the house prices in the southern part of the county have gone up about 14%. And in answer to the query that Councillor Watts asked earlier, our ratio of income to house price is around about 1 to 9 now. It was something like 1 to 4.6 in early days of the last LDP, so around about 2008 when we started work.
If I may interject on that. If I may interject on that specific issue. So, for example, Thornmore, Western Avenue, the oldest council house street, the longest in Chepstow. So, just before the election, you could buy, the standard, they're all pretty much exactly the same. 3-bedroom council house for 138. Now they're on the market for £200,000. So in fact, they are the new commuters. What I'm saying is, you might think I'm being a bit socialist about this now, but it's working class people. It's the same across, that are new and old, whether they consider themselves to be working class or not, being driven out because the property prices are going up. Now we have to tackle that. Otherwise, the demographic seriously changes. That's not just to save my own skin as well, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Feakins?
Yeah, just to pick up on that last point, really, that's an exact reflection of what's happening in Monmouth Town itself. So it's not just, I know it feels probably as if it's directly related to Severn Bridge, but that is as a county-wide issue. Just to give a bit of information, but also just to say to Mark, really, regarding the direction for the LDP review, I think definitely a whole review is needed and required in order to stop speculative developers. But I think it would be good to get a real firm handle on strategic development by the Welsh Government, in as much as the Relief Road, obviously the M4 Relief Road, will make a big impact on how we would like to see the LDP rolled out, I guess. And if there's any other sort of improvements in the offing, which are likely to come forward in the next 5 to 7 years, again, if we've got existing infrastructure which is being paid for by Welsh Government, Trunk Road Agency or whoever it is, it would make sense for us to develop around that trunk road or around that external infrastructure that we're not having to pay for as opposed to ourselves. So it would be good to have a sort of front-loaded dialogue with Welsh Government, I suppose, as part of the LDP process.
Yep. Mark?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. We can look at that. Probably the M4 relief roads, one of the few at the moment schemes that they're involved in. A lot of the other regional sort of strategic infrastructure come through the Cardiff Capital Region City deal. And part of the recommendation for Monday is that you agree in principle, to enter into a strategic development plan for the Cardiff Capital Region. Again, that's a debate for Monday. Appreciate that there's several unknowns around that. The members will need to be briefed on again in the future. But in principle, an agreement for the 10 of us to get on with that work and look at some of that infrastructure at that level. There's all kinds of other issues around. I mean, we talked about the tolls already. Again, the focus is on housing, but it's also going to open up opportunities potentially for employers who might look over here instead of locating in the Bristol area. We've had some work already started which touches on some of the points made, looking at the economies of the future in Monmouthshire. So looking at our demography, but also the growth sectors, as best as we know them now and how they might change in the future. You know, the impacts of things like automation, how job growth links in with prosperity and prosperity growth. So not necessarily the same thing. And trying to tie all that together. Again, economically, some really interesting research started. So our median age in the county is 48 compared to 34 in Cardiff. We have a really low economic base in terms of economically active population because our population's older. You know, we haven't got a massive population size on benefits or out of work. It's primarily that they're older and retired or not needing to work. So how does that link in with economic growth? If we just carry on doing what we're doing, where does that leave us economically with an ageing population? So trying to tie all of that stuff together, both on our own but also regionally. Although I talked about the SDP, the Strategic Development Plan, we need to look east as well as west. So we've got quite a complex picture, but a lot going on. But I think we're as on the ball as we can be with the bits we know about at the moment, and the bits the members are telling us. But it's definitely work in progress to go forwards on.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Figgins? Yeah. Councillor Roden?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for your presentation. The north and south of the county appears to be quite different because you've got the M4 corridor in the south, the Cardiff Capital City region, probably driving along that. So was there any difference in the responses, individual responses in the north and the south of the county? And if not, would you expect there to be if you'd broadened the consultation further? Thanks.
The honest answer is we haven't disaggregated the responses in that way. But I have read them all. So a lot of them were in terms of landowners or developers. So the developers, you know, they're looking at the whole county. They did particularly refer to the south because they're talking about things like the 7 tolls. But they do look at the whole county. Others were talking about the reliance on strategic sites in the main towns and whether we should be looking at growth around villages. A couple of people mentioned doing something completely different, like a new settlement. And again, that's a discussion that would be something to be debated and grappled with if we do a completely new plan, whether that's the right option for us or not. Probably the responses from the other main group who were more opposed to development, thinking through who they were largely focused in the south of the county, possibly because they see that's where the greatest pressures might be. I'm just thinking through now who the replies are from. Yeah, I think that's largely true to say. Although we had replies from Monmouth Chamber of Commerce, but then that's largely because they're pretty engaged. We know we meet with them regularly, so we have some existing dialogue there that's benefited from. So I haven't properly analysed the responses in terms of who said what and where they are. We could have a further look into that. I think probably what's more important though is if we go forward into a new LDP, whether that's a short form revision or a full blown plan, is making sure that engagement is throughout the county. It might well work out that there's, once we've got beyond the point of saying what a strategy is, where growth might be, that we have some more targeted things around certain town council, community council clusters or areas. If there's certain things that affect different areas more so than others, then we'll just have to be flexible at that as we go forward. But we don't know what that looks like yet. So,
did you want to come back on that, Councillor Roden?
That was sufficient, thank you.
Councillor Becker.
Yeah, thanks. Just to speak in support of the involvement of the committees as we sort of scrutinise the LDP. When you look at some of the work we've done in this committee in workshop format on procurement, for instance, it made us very aware that there are things we could be doing similar to the agricultural hub for construction, which could enable local supply chains to take on some of this burden in the LDP. Also, things that we can use in the Wellbeing Future Generations Act to enable that procurement. These are sort of details which don't seem to feed into the LDP until you then realise that the LDP needs to be a tool to allow that. So we need to have a more qualitative breakdown of what sort of industrial units we have, whereabouts in the county, rather than we have an X amount of offices available for companies. We need to know, do we have the right kind of facilities for startups with shared working space in the particular areas that they're going to be desirable, and elements of that nature, and our plan needs to be more detailed in that regard, which I think you'll find, possibly even just being with the committee and talking through it sometimes highlights these issues. So I think it's definitely an important thing for us to do, and we really don't want to wait. We've been waiting, we've been recommending that we redo the LDP for 2 or 3 years now, I think, and if we wait any longer, it's just, it's already an irrelevance, really, so we do really need to get on with it, don't we? So, but anyway, just speaking in support of that. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Dovey?
Just a very brief one. We've talked about housing and the impact of more housing, but the one thing we haven't talked about with the movement of people into South East Wales, up as far as Monmouth, etc., is transport. We haven't spoken at all about the roads. I mean, you take the situation in Chepstow in the mornings, now on the A46, you're likely to be queuing up at Chepstow Racecourse to get down to the roundabout at Newhouse Farm. The same at Pulmerich the other way. So we need to have a more closer view of, when we're doing the LDP, of what is the impact on our transport systems, and if they're not going to be adequate, what are we going to do about it?
Chair, sorry, if I may, it's not just that though. It's kind of belt and braces, isn't it? So you're absolutely right. I know you're going to get a nervous twitch, but schools, for example, that's it. The health surgeries, how the predictions there. So effectively, we've got 3 surgeries looking after 17,000 people. All those things need to be factored in. But I'm sure Mark will look at that in a lot of detail, won't you, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I nearly mentioned earlier about the wider infrastructure, but one of the comments that we keep getting loud and clear from you is around things like the healthcare infrastructure, doctor surgeries in particular. In the last plan, we consulted with the ABHB. They came back saying that the infrastructure was sufficient for the growth. That clearly isn't what you're telling us. It clearly isn't what communities are telling us. Recently met with a GP practice within the county who explained to us how their side of things works, because there's a lot of misunderstanding or confusion, I think, around how things like GP surgeries are funded. So we had a really good discussion about what they need from us. So we're looking at rolling that out. I've got contact details now in ABHB, so we're going to make sure that that engagement's far more strengthened in the next plan going forwards, and we're all talking the same language, if you like. The other infrastructure that Councillor Dovey mentions, absolutely, we need to look at all of that. So, we'll be looking at population and household projections, which essentially say, if everything carries on as it currently is, this is what happens. Then you add in economic or other aspirations. So it's sort of the lowest level for us, if you like, will be our natural population is in decline. Our population growth is relatively low, but it's from in-migration. So we can use some records to understand, things like GP registration, to understand where people have come from. But our lowest growth projection, if we like, will just be carrying on with that. And then if we add in any kind of economic aspiration or tackling things like the demography and the affordable housing, where does that take us? And then if we do that, where does that leave us with transport, with GP surgeries, with schools? We need to factor all of that in.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Any other further questions, comments? Councillor Becker?
Just me again, sorry. In terms of schools and taking into account our border nature, when you're planning ahead for those spaces, yes, we can say we're probably going to have this amount of homes. That's probably going to be a migratory population. We can't base our school capacity on birth rate as we've traditionally done. We also do need to look a little bit on our immediate border. So in Sedbury, there's going to be likely 1,100 homes or so when the barracks get sold. There's another several hundred being put up there already in Tuts Hill. That's going to place a burden on the Wydene School. Many of the pupils in Wydene School actually come from Chepstow. They will probably not be able to go there. They will go to Chepstow School. So we have to look at the immediate effect of the knock-on of development on our borders as well when we're looking at those capacities. And I think that's not something we've really seen, that kind of outward-facing planning previously in the LDP, and I think we really do need to be wary of that because of the extreme growth we're going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It probably doesn't give a huge amount of comfort in a way, but those conversations are happening at officer level. Talking with education colleagues and saying, well, yeah, but that's happening over there. Exactly the scenario you've said. So the Chepstow people who currently rely on Wydene, they potentially won't be able to in the future. Similar discussions up in the Monmouth area because of pupils coming across, and also Abergavenny because pupils get on the train and go up to Hereford, or vice versa. I think largely going out at the moment. We absolutely need to look at all that. Also links in with Kylie and Comp, because at the moment children from Usk and Raglan go there, but that might not be the scenario going forwards. So that could put extra pressure on Monmouth or other schools. So yeah, we've absolutely got to look at all of that.
You just put your microphone on, sorry.
Yeah, in as much as that. So when you talk to the other authority, and I have to be careful because there's potential for conflict here, in as much as when you engage with them, and they'll say privately that they're exhausted, they feel that they're financially exhausted, they're fearful of another judicial review. Remember those sites, I think, went to 1 or 2 judicial reviews. Mark Harper was engaged in that process as well. I talked to him privately about it. And what I'm worried about is that they've got no resistance to any potential further developments, and also that we will then fall foul of this, that the pressure that these developers have, the financial might that they have, the bully boy tactics of some of their legal team or the people that represent them will just kind of basically we won't be able to defend ourselves really. What have you, I know I'm putting you on the spot now, Mark, so I apologise, but what can you do to reassure this committee that you have the strength to fend these people off in light of some of the exchanges that you and I have had about their way of wriggling out of their responsibility towards social housing historically?
I guess there's 2 slightly different aspects to that. The starting point with planning and development is we have a plan-led system. So the LDP is the basis for our decisions. So as we're working through this next plan, once that plan's adopted, and that's the basis for those decisions, we'll have the policies around affordability. We do have to take into account viability of schemes. But there's also a requirement in the next plan coming from the Welsh Government. Going back a step, there's a recognition that most authorities in Wales now have an LDP. Only 6 have got a 5-year housing land supply. The main reason around sites not coming forward, I think primarily elsewhere rather than here, is around viability. So there's a whole emphasis from the Welsh Government on any next plans. We're going to have to make sure sites are deliverable and viable. People can't just lob them in a plan, have a bit of uplift on their land and sit on it. It's either got to come forward or it doesn't go in the plan. So that bit of work's got to happen. That will give us greater certainty around what's going to happen. The other scenario to it, so once that plan's adopted, that is the development plan, that's the starting point. People coming in with other developments, they won't be in accordance with that plan. we'll have the whole discussion around what's in the plan and what those growth pressures are and where that development goes as part of the LDB process. So that'll be part of the pressure from developers. The other point in relation to the question is the gap between now and having the new LDP in place. We haven't got a 5-year land supply now, we've got 4. So although the starting point is the LDP, National Planning Policy then makes it clear that not having a 5-year land supply is a very strong planning consideration. And we have to look at whether or not unallocated sites should be looked at favourably if they're otherwise acceptable in planning terms, and we've got a few coming forward now, we've approved 2 already, then the default position is we grant consent. But they do have to address those infrastructure problems. So if a site coming forward now in this gap between us having a 5-year land supply and having a brand new plan, if it isn't acceptable in normal planning terms, for example, it's just literally in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, we're still on the leading foot. It's just a clear no. Appeal decisions so far are protecting the green wedge. So some of those higher level policies, which is particularly relevant around Chepstow, again, we're on a firm foot there. But I mean, any other sites are just sticking some housing where it might be sensible otherwise. But if they're not delivering affordable housing, they're not delivering the infrastructure that's needed, or it's all fine, but it creates a highways problem, then they're still sound planning considerations to make decisions. If we end up with a really low housing number, you do get appeal decisions where inspectors are saying, well, the need for the housing's overriding. We're a way off that at the moment. We're on 4 years. We should be 5. It generally goes in one direction, which is down. It's quite hard to get it to go back up. So realistically, will we regain a 5-year land supply? I'm doubtful. But I don't think we're going to be in the realms of some authorities in South East Wales, which are at 1.2 years, 1.4 years. We're a way off that. So I have got confidence that we can defend, those unacceptable schemes. There will be developments coming forward outside of the current LDP. That's going to happen. That is a natural part of the process, the way it's set up. But we can shape those and make sure we're looking at acceptable ones and not problematic ones. And then the growth pressures, the first part of my answer was around the growth pressures. That's getting the right sites in the next plan and getting that plan adopted, assuming we go down that route of a new LDP.
Good. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to talk specifically about the LDP, but I want to make a general statement. I think one thing that strikes me here that we've got a lot of committee members, a lot of members of the council who want to help, want to be involved. We pushed the procurement element. We had some very good workshops. We're talking about business. We're talking about the LDP. The thing that concerns me is that I'm talking to somebody that's worked in private enterprise here now, that things often we start off at this level and then gradually nobody knows what's going on. And if you talk about procurement, for example, I don't really know where we are now with the procurement initiative. We've spoken about business. We've had one meeting, but we haven't had any more meetings. And I think we really got, as an authority, we got to decide, do we really want to change the way we do things and actively involve members in, perhaps they won't be making the decisions, but having an input into what's going on. And I feel that that's best done in, not in an official atmosphere like it is now, but, somewhere in a workshop or somewhere where everybody can give their opinions and those opinions can be taken on board. And collectively, we come up with a strategy for the authority, because we can't afford to stand still. We all know that. I always feel that the decision-making process is very convoluted in local government, and perhaps we really need to look at the culture there and the way we do things, because everybody else is not standing still. We need to move as quickly as we can, make the right decisions. But we are here to help if we can, but we can't do that unless we've got a forum to do it. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with that. And if Councillor Devey, if you make your point, I think we'll make that the final point, and then we'll wrap up then.
Well, it's a very short one, and it comes out of the comments that were made about the schools. If you're talking about a way or how things can be distorted with new people coming in, if you like, a new clientele like of young people. The fact that we have in Chepstow the unique situation that it's being surrounded by 3 21st century schools, and as far as the development of Chepstow School is concerned, it isn't even mentioned on any documentation that comes up at all. It's almost as if Chepstow School is forgotten about. I mean, in the council meeting when we talked about the budget, somebody actually mentioned Chepstow School. It was the first time it had been mentioned, and I actually cheered. That's an internal political thing, but the point I'm trying to make is that there are a new coterie of people coming into the area. I'm not even sure that the Welsh curriculum suits what they will be asking for, but whether or not there are going to be pressures with people looking to see where they can send their Chepstow, where their children could go to in the Chepstow area. There are 4 choices, 3 of them are brilliant, and the 4th one isn't in terms of the state of the building and the facilities. So that is going to distort the market within the Chepstow area. I'm just picking up on what Jess said. Bringing attention.
Yeah, no, I absolutely take your point. Thank you for that. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for bringing those consultation responses, allowing us to scrutinise. I think it's clear, in terms of the housing and economic growth that members here would like to see. I think you'll probably see us looking to support a full review come Monday, but I may be wrong in that. But that's the sense I'm getting from the committee. It's clear in terms of consultation methodology that we get that right in our need to expand the reach of the groups that we need to hear from. And I think Councillor Watts was absolutely right in terms of looking at and speaking to the pupils and parents today that are bringing up their children now and what they want now and for the future. We do want to see that. We already know we've got demographic pressures with an older population, but there's a danger of seeing that skewed even further with local people who've grown up in Monmouthshire all their lives being forced out because of demands on unaffordable housing. It's also, I think, imperative that we get the models for housing right in the future and look at creative and innovative models elsewhere, whether that's just across the water or elsewhere in the UK. I think it's right. Councillor Feakins suggested an early discussion with Welsh Government about their regional strategic development, and particularly infrastructure and transport infrastructure in and around, particularly the south of the county. I think is very important. I think a number of members have suggested that we're already seeing significant housing change in terms of cost uplift, not just in the southeast but right across Monmouthshire, and that's probably an early indication of what is going to come when the tolls come down the end of this coming year. So, and I hope you've got quite a bit of comfort from members here that they want to be engaged. I think we certainly welcome a steering group, working steering group. I know there'll be a number of members that will want to be a part of that from this committee, and the earlier we can start that process, the better, I think. So thank you very much. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for your time. Okay, if we're going to move on then, or move back to agenda item 5, which is sale of County Hall, Cwmbran. We've got Ben Winstanley and his opposite counterpart from Tyvine, who are going to present. They're just coming down now from the back. Hi, Ben. So I think it'll be important just to have a short potted history, I think, of the sale before we go into the paper, because I think we've got a number of new members of this committee and new members of this council who probably don't know the full history. So sort of a pre-seed history, I think, would be welcome. But if you'd just like to introduce yourselves before you go on, thank you.
First of all, Chair, thanks very much for moving the item around, and my apologies. I'm Ben Winstanley, the Estates Manager for Monmouthshire Council.
And I'm Victor Mvundula, Corporate Estate Manager for Tavine County Borough Council.
So if Ben, if you could possibly give that short potted history and then go into your report, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, a few of you will remember County Hall, a few of you won't. We vacated the site in 2012, and prior to us moving away, both councils set up a project board led by the late Steve Greenslade at the time, and that worked how we would exit from the site. We moved out of the building in 2012, and the responsibilities were split at that point. To Monmouthshire County Council would do the demolition of the existing building and the site preparation, and Torvine Council would take over the disposal, it being within their planning area. So it was originally placed on the market. I don't know the exact date of that. When was the exact date that it was originally placed on? Just after?
It would have been in 2014, because the demolition was finished in October 2013. We then went to market in 2014. We had a preferred bidder at the time that was approved by both councils. But during the process of the transaction, they came back seeking a reduction, which was in the order of about £1 million, to which we said no. And then we'd had 6 or 7 offers in the round of marketing. So when we declined this price reduction, we took a decision to go back to those 6 or 7 bidders, including the one that had put out to us for revised bids. There had been a little bit of additional information that had come up. So in light of that additional information, in terms of the parameters of the site and the constraints, we asked for revised bids, and that led to a different preferred bidder out of that pool of 6 or 7 that we'd had originally. We worked with the second preferred bidder for about 12 months, in which they were doing planning consultations, site surveys, and firming up their proposal. But over time, it became evident that they were struggling to meet timescales for exchanging contracts and submitting their planning permission. We gave them several deadlines, which they missed, and then we took the decision that we couldn't waste any more time, so we pulled out of the transaction as well. So that was at the beginning of 2017. And then at that point, in March 2017, we went back to the market afresh, because it'd been quite a long time from 2014 to 2017. And it's out of that process that we now have the offer that's being recommended this morning, Chair. Thank you.
Shall I go into the report now and just sort of? Yeah. Okay. So the start of that is that we'll split the receipt 50-50. What came of the March marketing procedure was that 6 bidders came forward. At that point, Victor undertook a shortlisting exercise where 3 bidders were shortlisted. It was clear from the financials which 3 of those it would be. It was fairly straightforward. The other 3 were allowed another period of time in order to enter the site to carry out further due diligence, to refine their offers, get to know their abnormals. The original bids were subject to a number of conditions which we were keen to discharge so we could get some clarity on the price. they all went in and carried out whatever due diligence they saw fit, and then came back to us with best and final offers. At that point, a single bidder was chosen. There were still conditions attached. They weren't completely discharged at the point in the previous investigations. The bidders were stating that they needed some exclusivity in order to commit the funds required for some of the more detailed investigations. So we then, Victor then took the preferred bidder and allowed another period of time in order to engage with the local planning authority and refine some of the details of the site. From that final exercise, there was a further refination of the abnormal costs. The drainage strategy that was assumed was not acceptable to the Welsh Water and the Planning Authority. The Highway Authority. There were some alterations within the 106 and clarifications more than alterations, not by the Planning Authority, by the bidder themselves. And further ground investigations were undertaken, which increased the abnormals further. So the bid was then, another bid was made, which was discounted further from the best and final offer. Comfortable that the technical reasons stated were valid. However, unfortunately, the bid that then came in wasn't below our expectations or our opinion of what the site was worth. So we met with the bidder and explained that this was not acceptable to us. At which point they have increased their offer, and we are now comfortable that this represents best value for the authority in order to proceed on this basis. So you'll note I haven't named any of the parties in there because we are still subject to contract. We will be going into heads of terms once we get the cabinet approval to proceed. But we're asking for your approval of the process that's been undertaken to date, and yes. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Comments, questions, Councillor Watts?
It's just, sorry, apologies. To ask any specific questions, because of I guess you're going to cite commercial confidentiality, but clearly there's been some serious horse trading between you and potential interested parties. It's one thing to say you're satisfied, but you have to, I'm reading here on some of the Torvine stuff, it says, and I don't pretend to be, it says under section 123 of the Local Government Act, local authorities have a duty to dispose of the land for best consideration. Do you now feel, because it's probably going to be the best answer we're going to get in light of what I've just said, do you now feel that you've done that, or you're in the process of doing that?
Simply yes. Prior to the with the best and final offer when it came forward, personally, no, I wasn't comfortable. But now the refination of the bid has come forward. Yes, I'm comfortable now.
And if I may, Chair, also again, I appreciate some of it is commercially confidential, but so the sale of the asset depended on elements of affordable housing as well, didn't it? So what has changed along the way? Again, I know you've got to be careful about what you say, but is that changed at all? So the aspirations, expectations of affordable, have they been beaten down as well, or have you stood strong and held your ground there?
No, the bid and the development is compliant with policy, which in Torvine is 30% of the overall development. It will be delivered as affordable housing. 30%. Yep.
Councillor Roden?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of section 3.5, it said that the preferred single bidder selection was made by Torrevine. I'm just curious to know what the process that you used to do this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. As been indicated, when we had the initial set of bids, we had 6 offers that came in. We shortlisted 3 of those, and that was based primarily on the prices that were submitted. Each bidder took a different view of the density that may be acceptable on the site. So there's quite a range in terms of the plots that were being proposed for development by each individual bidder. But looking essentially on the financial side, we picked the 3 that were shortlisted, and one of the requirements from the shortlisting was that they would engage with the planning authority to discuss the density, so whether their proposed density was deliverable, acceptable in planning terms, but also undertake the site due diligence and refine their bids on that basis. So when they then came back with their best and final offers, the parameters that were variable when we're selecting the 3 had narrowed down significantly. So we're getting closer and closer to comparing like with like. And then when we selected the preferred one, which we granted exclusivity, they then went through again a process of refining based on further discussion with the planning authority, but also with the drainage authority and Welsh Water. So in terms of the offer that we're looking at now is actually only subject to planning permission. There are no conditions relating to any technical issues with the site itself, because that they've had ample time to address, and they understand that when we're accepting their offer, it is solely that if any parameters change, it will have to be something unseen that comes out of the planning process. So the offer is as robust as we can have it at this stage, without obviously preempting what the planning process formally might bring out. But there has been engagement in that respect, and there's been engagement with other authorities that would have a view on what happens on the site. So on that basis, I'm quite comfortable with where we are, as comfortable as we can be at this juncture. Thank you.
Do you want to come back to that, Councillor Rowden?
Thank you, Chair. Was there much difference in the 3 bidders? Was there the one that selected a standout bidder, or were they relatively closely matched?
There was one bidder which was a bit of an outlier out of the 3. We were surprised at the level that they came back at, but then the density that they proposed was much lower. And from the planner's point of view, as it happens, just in terms of the layout, that would have been, if they were picking a site solely based on the layout and the density, they would have picked, the planners that is, they would have picked the one that actually was giving us the lowest price. But obviously, from the landowner's point of view, it's not the layout that was driving my remit, it was the price. But we had the other 2 which were relatively close to each other, the higher 2.
Without disclosing any of the names, as we've trying very hard not to, it's safe to say that 2 were sort of regional developers, but there was one that was significantly under, which was a volume house builder who, it was disappointing where they came through into. So it was really between the other 2 regional ones that were there.
Okay, Councillor Davis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I see that the offer is subject, obviously, to planning permission. So assuming that isn't too much of an issue, when would you anticipate the sort of capital receipts being available to both authorities? And just as an aside, it's very pleasing to see 30% affordable housing. Well done. I wish we could achieve that all the time. It would be very good. So when would you anticipate the deal being done? Because obviously these capital receipts are very important for both authorities. Thank you.
Based on the progress that's been made so far and the apparent eagerness by the preferred bidder to progress with this process, I would be surprised if we didn't have the capital receipt this calendar year. So I would expect that by the end of this calendar year, we should have the capital receipt. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have it in our MTFP for next financial year, so achieving in that period.
Can we come back on that, Councillor Davis? Are you happy? Councillor Figgins?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gents. A couple of points. Can I just very quickly ask and then come back if I may? What was the offer immediately before this offer? So the offer that you was disappointed with, that was then revised to get to this offer now, which is before us.
Sorry. Yeah, after we selected the preferred bidder and they engaged further with planning, let me take a step back. When they first came in, they were proposing 160 plots. And we accepted on that basis. They then went through further engagement with planning, and partly because of the tree constraints that are on the site, there were some areas where there are copses of trees, but because we've got a lot of woodland around the site, their view was some of the trees potentially could be removed and plots put there, but there was quite a strong pushback from the planners. So we ended up in a position which was the worst case scenario for them, which was 138 plots. And it's on that basis that we took a report to Vine's cabinet, but on the understanding that it was a worst case scenario and there was still some engagement to be undertaken with the planning authority, which would hopefully reinstate some more plots. So at that point, for the 138 plots, the figure was £2.24 million. They've then had further engagement with the planners and reinstated some more plots and came back with an offer which was 2.47, so just under 2.5 million. But that we still felt, having regard to other transactions within the locality, was below what we would consider market value. So we've engaged with them further, and still with the 5 plots reinstated, they have then improved their price to 2.9. But the contract will still have a proviso that if there is more scope for more plots, because this still, they don't have planning permission yet, they will submit a planning application, and there may be that they can reinstate some more plots. If that happens, then we'll be looking at this price improving, but we're looking at this as the bottom line now. Thank you.
Councillor Figgins, come back on that.
Okay, thanks. That sounds really robust and pragmatic, and I think the overage clause is important to make sure that that's in there to protect our position moving forward. I think the other thing that we ought to be really careful of, because I know it's come back before us as a planning committee, in as much as that it was agreed with the sale site that a 30% provision would be made for affordable housing. The site started, or the site was sold and commenced, and some of the abnormals hadn't been thrashed out robustly enough at the front end of that process. And they then brought it back before us and said, well, actually, we can't provide those 30% houses now. Now we need to whittle it back down to 17%, and it was accepted at 17%. Now, there is a way you can do that, obviously, within the contract to make sure that can't happen. So basically, what we would, in effect, be doing would be having the overage clause in place to protect us on any uplift, but we would be in a position that we wouldn't have to accept anything less than the 30%. By the sounds of it, you've already gone through that process of thrashing out the abnormals. But that doesn't mean to say that the precedent hasn't been set already, to say that they could come back and argue to say they suddenly found whatever those circumstances would be, that would suddenly start to deride at the 30%. So that's just one point, just to make, just to note really, I think that we need to be careful. And just one other quick point is that there's been quite large tracts of land have been sold by Welsh Government and also by local authorities, which has then been challenged at a later date, properly so and correctly so, and I don't know what the processes were for those at that time, but I think that was only right that they should be challenged and should be held to account. Just bearing in mind, I'm comfortable with the processes you've been through, and I think you've just explained it well, and it's been through a long, drawn-out process. I don't think you could do anything better, and I think you've just upped it by 400 grand in the last off in. So I think that's a significant achievement and credit to you. But just to protect ourselves from any challenge in the future, should we get DVS or some external valuation, just to confirm that and just to sort of put an insurance wrapper on it, really, to say that what we've achieved or what you guys have achieved is significant and appropriate for the sale. And like I said, that would just protect us in any future regard of any challenge. Just to put it back.
Okay, couple of points there. In terms of the 30%, absolutely. I think that is what we'll write into the overage in terms of making sure that doesn't shift. And with the abnormals, we don't want to go into the detail of what it is, but I'd be aiming for getting some sort of baseline as to what they were going to spend and move on. We have done deals like that in the past. In terms of your second point around the DVS, I'm a chartered surveyor, so's Victor here, and we're comfortable. Our normal procedure would be to sign it ourselves. So we wouldn't need to get anybody involved because of the. Going back to your point about the South Wales land, that was. Around the procedure that was undertaken, and a lot of value judgment was taken without it going out onto the open market. That was the kind of failure of the system there. We have tested the market here. We have, we've invited bids from all parties. We've had engagement from regional, smaller house builders. So I'm comfortable with that aspect of it. The other little gem to fire in is that the 30%, again, I'm not going to give away who the bidder is, but it's actually a joint bid with a local housing association. So the likelihood of that 30% being chipped is low. I know because I've asked the question as Monmouthshire against Torvine as to how that would happen as a sort of, from our due diligence, from our side, because it's not in our area. And it's fair to say Victor and his planning colleagues were fairly robust to say that just because Monmouthshire aren't happy with the price, we won't be chipping it. So we've asked the question, albeit accepted the answer as a firm no.
You satisfied? Yep. Thank you, Councillor Dovey.
Just a very brief one. You've told us how much we're going to get for it. Cross fingers, touch wood. Could you give us an idea how much below our aspiration that was?
No, it's right on the aspirations that we had. We had originally the capital receipt was forecast at £1.5 million, and it is now in. That's what it's forecast in the MTFP as, and we're achieving £1.45 million. So it is below. Sorry, it's not exactly on, but given the level of investment that we've seen, the bidder has been very transparent with us in terms of the uplift in the drainage infrastructure that was required by the Highway Authority, and our expectations were probably a touch high, but we're there.
A touch higher. I'm really interested in a touch higher, but you obviously are happy enough about that. I'm not going to embarrass you any further. And perhaps you'll whisper in my ear outside, and I promise I won't tell anybody.
So, sorry, I might not have been clear. When we had the 2.4 on the table, it's very mood lighting kicked in again. We undertook a fresh appraisal of the site. So before we had a lot of the details, we had an expectation which we would put in the capital receipt forecasting, but as the detail comes through, we would refine it further in order to make sure that we were happy to sign it off, as Councillor Feakin says. But from calculating the GDV with the abnormal costs that are there and all the construction costs that are live taken from now or the last quarter, this is where we would expect the land value to be. So yeah, 50 grand below what we originally forecast is acceptable in terms of movement.
Fine.
I've got a question, Ben, before I go back out. Just in terms of Monmouthshire, what are we anticipating the final outcome to be compared to Torfaen? So, particularly in terms of 106 and other contributions Torfaen will be receiving from the receipt. Just wondering how that those two, in terms of those two figures, and what are we going to get? Really?
It's a straight down the middle 50-50. Yep. I mean, clearly the 106 is payable in the area that it affects, because as you guys have just discussed around the infrastructure and upgrading the infrastructure, etc., that's required in the immediate area. But yeah, all capital receipts will be net of any contributions that are made. That's the way it works.
Okay. And just finally, in terms of the police site as well, is that how further advanced is that in terms of being placed on the asset plan?
My understanding is that the police are looking at two adjacent sites within the Lantam area of Cwmbran. They are looking at a 2-year timescale to move to the new site. I think they've put in an outline planning application, if I understand correctly. But when we started this process back in 2012, we were working with the police to dispose of the entire site together. But we got a point where we were more keen on the capital receipt, and the police were prevaricating in terms of what they actually want to do with their site. I think it's when we had the Police and Crime Commission, the first one, he was undertaking a review, and his inclination was that he preferred to stay on the site. So because there was that uncertainty, and we needed the capital receipt, we decided we'd progress by ourselves. But even as part of that decision, we did a mini survey among developers as to whether this would be a disadvantage to us, having the county hall site separated from the police site, and the feedback that we got was they were indifferent to that aspect. So, yeah. So whether we've gone along with the police, the outcome is more or less the same based on what they told us. Yeah. Thank you.
And Mark will wince at my comment here, but actually there's a risk in delaying and waiting for that as well, because there is proposed. Community infrastructure levy is proposed in Torfaen, and if we let it roll on a little bit further, the sprinklers are already in from when we weren't from the first bid, but community infrastructure levy could reduce the capital receipt further. So if we waited for the police.
Okay, Councillor Watts.
Yeah, it's a rather frivolous question, but just out of curiosity from someone who spent probably too much time there. It's on. Whatever happened to the nuclear bunker? Because I'm just thinking, if you're a housing association tenant and you're a prepper, you're going to luck out, aren't you, potentially?
I'll give a boring answer to that one. It was demolished, and actually the ground condition survey, I have read it, Victor, has notes that actually it's a reason for upgrading some of the foundations that in and around there on top of some of the fill. So they've upgraded from strip up to pile foundations. So. Yeah, they're preparing for something potentially being under there, but no, it was. My understanding is it was removed, or filled in, wasn't it?
Is that right? Yeah. It's only I used to see Peter Fox take kind of oodles for baked beans down there quietly in the evening, and I never asked any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any Councillor Figgins? Yeah.
I just checked the figures. But just to come back on that one point that I said regarding the Section 106 monies and the affordable housing write-down that I think we may have done. I don't think the figures that I gave you earlier was perhaps correct. We went from 35 down to 33% and dropped down from 18 units to 17 units. But it was more the point in principle, really, that they didn't find abnormals at a later stage that they could then look to reduce the which you answered. But it was just to correct that one point as we're being recorded. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any further questions, comments? No. Councillor Becker? Yeah.
Only comment I've got to make is say thank you to Victor for coming, and I personally am very impressed with the process. I think that your horse trading has paid off, so well done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, can I obviously thank Victor and Ben for coming and presenting this. I know we were obviously constraints, so some of our scrutiny was constrained because of commercial confidentiality, but I think we've given it a good airing in terms of what we can focus on. We've got a recommendation in the paper, which is to recommend to Cabinet the acceptance of a subject to contract basis, the offer for the purchase of Monmouthshire County Council's 50% share of the freehold interest in the former county site to the preferred bidder. Are we happy to make that recommendation to Council? Those in favour? Yep, that's carried. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you for your time. Okay, item 7, the market in Monmouthshire for business. It's stated here for a verbal update from myself. The meeting happened at the start of this year. I think it was back end of January. And it was something that was going to be led by Councillor Davis. Unfortunately, Councillor Davis fell ill on the date of the meeting and couldn't attend. I managed to Skype into the meeting, but due to the connectivity of the Skype, it was a bit intermittent. And in terms of picking up the full conversation, it was a bit hard to follow at some stages, and in terms of the outcomes, I missed that because of it sort of broke up at the end. But I know there's a number of councillors here that did attend, and perhaps if I ask Councillor Feakins and perhaps Councillor Becker just to briefly feedback and perhaps suggest some options to move forward. Councillor Becker first, yeah.
Yeah, it was a very useful meeting. It was convened with the intention of looking at how we present the county outside of ourselves, how we actually market the county to prospective businesses and investors. We did diverge into quite a few different areas. I think the general consensus, it became partly a conversation about what do we do to incentivise people and to attract people to the area. And some of the plans that we began to talk about in terms of incubators and making certain areas attractive to startups and where to recruit those startups from university towns in the nearby area were plans that officers have already been looking at in terms of shared workspaces, potential tax breaks for startups and elements of those nature. It's actually very encouraging to see. We also diverged into the quality of life in Chepstow being part of our selling point. Now, the interesting thing is that whilst there are a lot of plans being made about these elements and research into them, there still doesn't necessarily seem to be an actual who's going to do the marketing, where are we going to go, how are we going to do it. There is still a little bit of this sort of if you build it, they will come mentality, and it's something I think that as a committee we can certainly contribute towards more. Obviously, when we have more of us there and we can get a firmer action plan from everybody being present. I'll hand over to Councillor Feakins and see what he can remember of it as well. So.
Councillor Feakins?
Thank you, Jed. No, I think you covered it well. My takeaway from it really was that there is a fair bit of work that needs to be done. There is a planning process. There is work going on, extensive work by the council. You know, it's recognised that there are areas which we need to bring together and sort of get some collection of thought. One of the things that I suggested in that, which I think we'll bring up in a little while, was that I think we should have some sort of livability index or something like that, or work on something like that, to encourage people to locate their businesses here. At the end of the day, people, if you're a business, you're going to want to locate your business where your employees are going to be happy and their families are going to be happy. So we've got good schools, we've got good facilities in our area, but it's a matter of marketing those maybe as a collective thought. So there is a fair bit of work to be done still, or a huge amount. We're just at the start of the process. But I think that what we said was that we would try to get together because I think the more minds that we can bring into that forum, the better, that we try and bring ourselves together as a sort of working group as soon as we could, just to really hone in on those ideas and create an action plan at the back end of it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the action plan is probably the key point in that. Obviously, Kelly was there, Kath. I don't. She probably did feedback to you. Did you want to add anything at this stage?
Thank you. Yes, we've just had some initial baseline data back, which Mark referred to earlier, really, which is as part of the future economies analysis that we're actually undertaking. And it's actually saying that our economy in the last 15 years has performed below its full potential. And this is partly due to our age structure and the fact that we have low numbers in terms of working age groups. As Mark mentioned earlier, also our median age at 48 is actually the oldest in the capital region. Cardiff, for example, is 34. So whatever we do needs to attract those working age population. Also our young people, as mentioned earlier. So it did actually also highlight that our current, in terms of the sector analysis, manufacturing is relatively large and growing, which is actually bucking the national trend, and that business, professional and scientific is growing from a small base, but also arts, entertainment and recreation is growing well as well. So those are our key sectors really, but our job now really is to look at, that's the baseline information, what are now our drivers for growth, and really identifying the best routes, as you've just mentioned, in terms of drawing businesses into Monmouthshire. Also how we reduce our out-commuting rate, which is currently at 40%, which is obviously very high and is likely to increase as we go forward at the moment. But really in terms of also the housing discussion, really, how we sort of provide the accessibility and availability really of the affordable housing stock to attract our sort of target market really, and ensure then that we've got the right employment sites and premises in the right places. So it's quite an interesting dilemma for us, but one I think we would certainly very much welcome as a team working with yourselves to find out the way to solve it, or certainly put those things in place.
Okay, thanks, Kath. So I'm getting the feeling that we need another meeting, and pretty quickly, obviously, on the back of hopefully the approval council will give the LDP review, and it will be driving some of that work. Are we happy if I go back to with Kath and Kelly to arrange that? Possibly. I mean, I'm conscious that the Easter recess is coming up, and I don't want to impinge on that recess time. But if we can get a meeting in before the next E&D, which is the 26th of April, Councillor Becker.
Just to say, if we do, I think we would benefit Chair maybe from doing it in a kind of workshop format as we did with procurement, and making sure that we keep the focus, because it's so interconnected that it's very easy to diverge into various areas. But if we say that initially it was about marketing and how we go about taking our message out to places, if that's going to be the focus of the workshop, great. If we want to have a couple of different focuses, like as we did with procurement, that would also be very useful. But I think a little structure like that before we go into the meeting would help us get a much more viable action plan out.
I'm conscious this is Councillor Davis's not pet project, but it's something you suggested for us to take forward. So I'm just conscious, Councillor Davis, that you're happy for us to move in a particular direction. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some very valid points being made here. I think it's getting that into one strategy is really what we need. And obviously advertising Monmouthshire throughout the world. Let's be ambitious about it, because I think we've got a wonderful county here, and I've always felt we're not, attaining the potential of this county. Geographically, we're in a fantastic position, and we've got skilled workforce and all that sort of thing. And in my experience, if you don't push yourself out there, then nobody's going to do it for you. So I think we need to do that. And I think, the suggestion of a workshop is great, because a lot of good things come out of that. I don't want to repeat myself, but I think the key then is that we need to make sure that we keep the momentum, have an action plan and a strategy, and then move it forward, and we keep everybody involved, because I think if people are not kept informed and about what's going on, then eventually they will start to lose interest. You know, we're all here to help, but no matter what tribe we belong to, we all want the same things for Monmouthshire. You know, I'm not an expert in some things. I know a little bit about others, and Matt is a businessman. You know, our friend there is very good in IT. You know, he says he's a bit of a nerd. So that you know, David has a lot of experience. We're offering that help to the council. But what I'm saying to the council really is, well, you know, here we are. Let's get on with it and do it. And I think the potential is huge. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, Kath.
Thank you very much. It's really good to hear that. The other thing I would encourage members to do really is look at a website we looked at yesterday, which is Gloucester 2050, and that's actually their vision document, and the way that they portray the issues and the potential is really clever. It's very simple but very, very effective. So if you haven't looked at that, it's certainly worthwhile, you know, giving it a scan really. And they've got a real close eye on Bristol and what they're up to. So yeah, it's interesting.
Okay, I'll take that forward then with Catherine Kelly and look to schedule a workshop potentially before the next meeting. Councillor Watt? Yeah, I understand your cynical approach, but as you said, we can only do what we can do as a committee. You know, we can push back, and you know, as everything with good policy making, you know, it's got to be evidence based. You know, we can show that. And as Councillor Davis has rightly pointed out, there's a lot of experience within this new committee. Members that have come on board this year have got a lot to give, and I think they've already done that, and certainly showed that, particularly in the procurement workshop thus far. And that will, I'm going to touch on that then in the next item. But you know, I think we should be demonstrating what is good practice and putting pressure on the cabinet, and I think we can do that. We should do that. So if I take that forward then with Catherine Kelly, and I'll keep you updated. Yes, Councillor Devi, briefly.
Just a quick one, Chairman. I hear what Councillor Watt says, and I'm determined not to be as worldly wise. No, I'm determined not to be as I'll say prejudiced, but I don't. That's not quite the right word. I mean, if you think about what can happen, and it's a biggish thing, but years back, not even in the last council, but the council before, I was talking about City Deal, and you know, I'm not saying that I had anything to do with it, but I had the vision of what City Deal could do for this area of South East Wales. And these things do happen. People get ideas, and you've just got, if you think it's right, you've just got to keep on with it and bore everybody to death. And I've made that a speciality of keeping on with it and boring them to death. So that's what we're about. Just keep kicking it, and eventually you knock the door down.
There is obviously an easier way of it. It's just simply, you know, overtake the cabinet. Yeah, you could populate it with members here, and then it all becomes a reality. You know, that's the other option.
Yeah. Okay. If we move on then to item 8, which is list of actions from the previous meeting, and unfortunately, we haven't got anyone from Democratic Services here this morning. Hazel's on leave, and unfortunately Paul is unwell today. So, but I'm just going through, and I think some of the items, in terms of those, the letters that have been requested have been done and been sent back. I'm not sure if we've had any responses to that. You see the working group to be put together in relation to cross-border authority working, and that's on the next item that we'll look at. And I think there's elements that we'll probably touch on that next item in relation to that. In terms of broadband, again, I think that's another thing that will be on we can briefly discuss on the next item. I know the Cabinet Member for Social Justice, Sarah Jones, had a meeting with Welsh Government and BT at the beginning of this month, and I know she's keen to bring something back to us as a committee to scrutinise in terms of where we go forward as a county. But once we get someone from Democratic Services just to go through that again, I'll just update you on what has been done. But I think the majority of those things have been progressed, and there's a couple of things that will fall onto our forward work programme, which we'll go on to now, I think, and that's agenda item 9. So the cross-border visit, I think we were looking at convening some sort of group, another working group or task group, just to be absolutely clear with ourselves as a committee what we wanted and what we wanted to get out of this cross-border meeting. And I know Councillor Becker was certainly advocating that. So that's something obviously I'll take forward with Hazel when she comes back from leave. In terms of other items, I know there's been on the back of recent discussions and full council discussion on the budget. I know there was a number of members wanted to gain greater clarity of the funding formula, and I wondered if potentially we could have a joint scrutiny session with audit, and perhaps bring in Welsh Government and Welsh Local Government Association to present to us and look at that, because there are elements that probably are pretty opaque, not just to us as councillors, but if you go out to the general member of the public and ask about the funding formula, they wouldn't have a clue. So we need to trying to find some more transparency in terms of how we're funded as an authority, and what the differentials are. I know some members have been talking about, well, how do the weightings for the particular algorithm operate in practice? Who apportions those ratings? So I think that would be probably quite a valuable piece of work. I don't know if any members have got comments on that. No, Councillor Davis.
Yes, Chair. I spent a considerable amount of time looking at the funding formula, and I have to say that if you look at the elements within it, there doesn't seem to be much that's missed out. But what's missing is that transparency for how the actual calculation is carried out and what the weightings are for each of the elements. And I think it's concerning, I think, that it's not transparent and it's not easy to look at it and say, well, that's the figure. We don't know what the rurality is in there, for example, but there's no indication of what the weighting is for rurality. There's no indication of what the weighting is for deprivation. So none of us could sit down, I don't think. I was told that if I did understand it, I'd only be the third person in the world that did. And that's concerning because it needs to be open and transparent. It's difficult to make an argument against something if you can't actually see how that something is worked out. So I think, I think all of us in this room would be delighted if somebody would come and go through it and explain it to us, and then we can draw our own conclusions after that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. I guess the base point would be when you have a certain set of numbers that give you the value for rurality. So, for example, does the formulation take into account the mileage, the vehicles? It should be at that level in order to make it accurate. I just wonder if that is the case or not, and it would be great to find out. Because if it's not, it's an opportunity for us to actually starting to attack the basis of our funding. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so perhaps if we make an offer to the chair of audit committee, that is something that as a committee we would like to dig in a bit further, and perhaps suggest a joint session on that. I know in terms of the some of the cross-border elements, particularly councillors from the south of the county have got some interest in some of those elements. Councillor Becker, you've discussed about some of the transport issues across boundary, and you've been leading on one of the leaders on the pushing for a Chepstow bypass, or certainly improved infrastructure in Chepstow. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, to say that I'm pushing for a bypass is slightly inaccurate. It started off that way and then has become a very in-depth discussion with communities on both sides of the why about how we solve our transport woes. I have unfortunately had the Secretary of State for Wales cancel my appointment to talk to him in private about these things. I'm pushing for another one. But yes, well, I continue to look at that, and I'm very pleased that we've got a cross-border group that's been established between the officers now, who have commissioned a study into those issues, not just road transport, but the bus transport and various things, which is truly cross-border. And I would like for us to be appraised of the scope of that study as well, and be as involved as we can. I don't want to get in and try and make it difficult for them. I just want to know where they're going and sort of scrutinise, make sure that it's covering all the things that we think that it should be covering.
Yeah. Okay. Are we happy to make that request then to the Director of Operations perhaps to come and present on that? And certainly we'd like to meet his counterpart from Gloucestershire as well, and they'll be welcome to attend. Councillor Dovey, do you want to say something?
Yes, Chair. I was only going to say that this cross-border alliance, if you like, it really came through the transport strategy groups and a number of meetings that we've had over some years now, actually. And we have now got, as Jez has said, we have got this chance to have cross-border talks between the councils, Forest of Dean, Gloucestershire County Council, and our own. And this again, going back to what we were talking about just now, you just got to keep kicking the door, and eventually things do happen. And this has been a long time coming, but it's really great news. And we have now got some officer relationships between the councils, so we've got it on a firm footing at last, and that's to be applauded, I think. Well done to Roger Hoggins for getting there and doing the trick.
Okay, we'll make that request then for Roger and his counterpart to come and present on that. I know there was some other potential requests firstly on new technologies. Councillor Roden, do you want to speak on that?
I think that the council is facing severe financial restraint, and a possible way forward is to increase the efficiency of the systems that we have via the use of new technologies. And I think that over a period of time it could benefit the council. Some of these technologies could also be sold to other councils for to enable us to make a profit. And I think that there would be some value looking at where we are and where we were and see a difference, and also where we could be in the future with these kinds of technologies. There's a lot of things happening. I was talking to somebody the other day. They were talking about the use of bots, for example, when somebody telephones in, asks simple questions, the bot can actually respond. If it's a more difficult question, then it could be handled by a member of staff, so it saves staff time. I think there's a lot of value in these kinds of developments for us.
I'm obviously conscious of our remit and where democratic services look at some of this work. Councillor Watts, you want to comment on that?
That sounds fantastic. I'm mindful. I remember when under. I don't want to go through the pain of this again because it is almost painful. When CMC Squared were in when it existed, they went through a kind of a fairly lengthy process of trying to, and he did successfully, create some kind of software. And this, I don't want to go through the arguments again on whether it works or not, but there was always an aspiration that that they would try and sell that onto other local authorities. But it is very, very difficult to patent and to grab the, I guess in essence, the brand or intellectual property around a bit of software. And there are really big companies doing it. I was looking at a company yesterday, Blue Prism, and it's kind of robotic process automation. Some discussion about, I think in the States, that potentially it could take over 45% of the workforce. These are very controversial things, and particularly, the workforce might get quite concerned about it. And I just think unless we're doing it more globally, in conjunction with other local authorities, I think it's just a little bit, maybe I'm just not being particularly ambitious here, but I just think it's a little bit beyond our scope, really. At the end of the day, we're just a local authority, and we have been down this road before, and I've sat with officers who have been frustrated, not because they didn't have a good idea, simply that they just couldn't harness the intellectual property of what they were doing.
What do other members feel about that? Yeah, Councillor Becker?
Yeah, I think that we're slightly talking about two different things. There's the internal development of our own intellectual property, which is quite often the difficulty of that is underrated because of the black art of computers. People don't necessarily understand the problems that it brings. But I think there is a scope for examining how off-the-shelf products and working techniques could increase the productivity and economic strength of the county. But I think that you're quite right. I think that we're wandering into democratic services sort of territory if we're talking about how we apply those internally to the council. If it's about making businesses more aware about AI and its contribution to the economy or its opportunities, that's something I think that falls more under our remit. But yeah, internally it does feel a little bit more like a democratic services thing to me. So.
Councillor Feakins?
I think just maybe without looking to get a result at the back end of it, to have that discussion here in this forum would be a good proposal, in as much as that it is going to, that is the future. It is going to affect us internally. It is going to affect us externally. It would be nice if we could invite someone, if there was someone we could invite in to just give us a half-hour talk on it, so we all had a better idea of what it is going to look like in the future, because it's going to happen, and we can't put our head in the sand. I think I don't know enough about it to say whether we should be adopting it, shouldn't be adopting it, or whatever it is. But I know that Medibots are coming in, and I think that's going to change and revolutionise the landscape. So. For me, it'd be lovely if we had someone that we could pull in to come in and give us a chat for half an hour or a presentation for half an hour.
Okay, go on, Councillor Roden.
Thank you. There's a belief that we're talking about people in this, because of the reference to democratic services, but there are other technologies as well. You could have more environmental types of technologies, measurement technologies, for example, that would improve the performance of our environmental health department, which is quite stretched. So it's not just about reducing people and replacing them with alternatives. It's actually about improving the performance of the council, because we are always being challenged to produce more from less, and I think maybe it would be a good way to move forward. Thank you.
Councillor Feakins?
Just very quickly then, I think it is the remit of this It is the remit of this council to keep our eye on the ball, and I think that, you know, that's what this is about primarily.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Feakin's suggestion is an excellent one. That really we need to know what the policy of the council is at the moment, what is being done and what isn't being done. I mean, councils like this are very much people orientated. It's not like a manufacturing process where you can put a new machine in, for example, and get away with 50% of your workforce because of the improved productivity. It's not like that. It's very much about people with people in local government. And I think we are all aware that our staff are fairly stretched. We've got small teams. Anything that can be done that'll help them with that workload, I think. I'm not very fearful about too many people being made redundant personally, because I think there's far too much for people to do as it is. But I think it'd be useful for us as a committee to have some sort of insight to what are the sort of things that have been talked about. When are they talking about putting these things in position? What's the cost exactly? And what are the benefits? So I think that would be good. It's a really good suggestion, I think, Chair.
Councillor Devi. Councillor Devi, yeah.
The rare moment here. I share Councillor Watt's views about certain aspects of us going down the IT path. I think if you talk about the Blanavon adventure, I'm sure a lot of work that was done up there was really quite excellent, but it really didn't live up to expectations. No matter how you addressed it, it didn't live up to expectations, and I think perhaps that was because at the front end we didn't look at what to match our skills with the opportunities that were available. I think if you're going to come up with something like an IT project, you really have got to research the market for it to see what is going on and to spot the gap and where it can be more efficient. And that didn't happen up at Blanavon, and so I'd be very wary about going that route again, but to make ourselves more efficient, to source it, either develop or look at the market and explore what can make us money by being more efficient. I'm all in favour of doing that.
Okay, I'm conscious of trying to move forward on a consensual platform on this. I am conscious of, obviously in terms of our remit and democratic services, it does feel that members would like a discussion on, potentially AI and improving how that potentially improves local government going forward, how it improves. Yeah.
Just listening to what people are saying is, to be clear about the kind of thing that we're after here, what we're talking about is we want somebody internally, one of the officers, to come in and tell us how technology is being used to innovate in the council. Is that what we're after at the moment, and what they're sort of looking forward to?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Right, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm just conscious in terms of our remit. It does feel it's a democratic services item that they need to scrutinise, whether we could do that on a joint basis and potentially look at the wider external uses of any of that research or development, then that would come. So did you want to comment, Councillor Watts? Sorry, just your microphone again, sorry.
The mic. Sorry, and I remember sat in one meeting where we were reciting, one of the officers mentioned Google, and it was about, one of the things was fail fast, fail quick. I think that was the motto, and then it was 20% work time. And the day that we introduced 20% work time was the day that the guy who invented it left the company, because he openly admitted that the 25% work time, people spent 20% of the time messing around or not doing what they were supposed to be doing. Now, the reason I tell you this is that I'm not saying there aren't clever people within the authority, but those clever people are stretched already. Yeah, I don't think, if it is, as Jez says, about spending the time looking at how we work and how we're being productive and whether we can be, but if we're off on an adventure forgive me for saying this, by going down a road at looking that we are going to reinvent software for local government to improve the way that we work or make us more efficient, I'm not in on that.
Okay, Councillor Feakins.
Just to come in on that one point then, and really from my point of view then, Armin, would be to say that this isn't for us to create a new direction for anybody. It's just so that we have information, so that it's just like a memory model we need in order to make decisions in the future. And I think if we don't have that bit of information now, just to understand what that is, not to make any outcome of it, but just literally so we just get a grasp of what is going on, because that will inform us. We're not looking. I don't think we're looking to make any conclusion out of it or any action out of that. It's simply just an information model so that we understand. We're better informed, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So possibly, if I write to the chair of Democratic Services and say that as a committee we're interested in some of the aspects of how we're using automation or using new technologies to improve our efficiency and improve our productivity, then we would be certainly welcome to take part in a joint scrutiny session, and we would welcome that, and perhaps push them into putting them on their forward work programme now. And would that be useful? Yeah. Okay, we'll do that then. Were there any other items that councillors wanted to raise? Yeah, Councillor Feakins, in terms of the forward work programme.
Thanks, Chair. And I did mention it a little bit earlier, I think that it's going to fall into place with some of the other things that we're doing in any event, but this thing about livability index is really critical if we want to attract outside businesses into Monmouthshire. If you're a business in California and you want to relocate in the UK, the first thing you want to do is to make sure that your employees are going to be happy. They are going to have good schools. They are going to have good access to airports and facilities and everything else that goes along with it. So I think that it's really key that if there isn't already a livability index of which we can better position ourselves, so we need to understand how that matrix works. Let's create a livability index and let's put ourselves up there. Let's do that legwork ourselves. Let's put ourselves up there, because the reason people move to California is because when you see that advert on television for California, it paints the picture of the live-in scene. It doesn't tell you about the 9 to 5. It doesn't tell you about the figures, facts and figures. It paints the picture, and I think that's what we're capable of doing for Monmouthshire if we're looking for a better outcome for existing residents and for future residents. So that's what I'd like to bring forward.
Councillor Watt. Sorry, I think your microphone is off.
So who we think are the potential players, the people that have come over here that are interesting to us, why they've come here, what attracted them, and how we can then create a kind of, improve on that to create a kind of little Goldilocks zone for businesses like that. Like that business I talked about on the A market, up and coming business. Those are things that I'm interested in.
Councillor Becker.
I think we're coming back into the marketing thing here. It needs to be done. I don't know if anybody's seen the latest promotional video for Oregon. Well, I've got a lot of love for the way that Oregon, again, we can't compete on their scale, but I've got a lot of love the way they present their brand to the world to invite people to live there. So I think that there is a marketing conversation that needs to be had. Oregon. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think some of these issues will probably be drilled details in terms of what the next meeting in our marketing group. And I think Councillor Watt is right. I think we probably haven't done an outreach for a number of years as a committee. Some sort of business breakfast would be useful to bring in, not just to talk to our businesses internally, but to see why, particularly in the last year, those businesses that have relocated here, why did they come? What is the rationale for doing that? And obviously selling our wares to those externally as well, and trying to understand, particularly those in Bristol, and the surround. You know, what do they want? You know, what are they looking for? And can we you know, marry our you know, objectives, our strategic objectives with what they're looking for business wise. I'll go Councillor Becker, then Councillor Roden.
Very briefly, I mean, we said about maybe having a few topics on the workshop for marketing. Marketing requires market research. The business breakfast and inviting people in and talking to them is market research, perhaps. The market research of how we inform those marketing decisions needs to be part of one of those topics. So,
okay, Councillor Roden.
Thank you. We have a number of very wealthy Chinese visiting Monmouth to visit their children in the independent schools, and I wonder if we could actually tap into that because they have their own businesses in China, and if they're looking for an expansion over in the UK, they're already visiting us, so if we can expand on that, it may be beneficial.
Councillor Davis and Councillor Devi.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there's some very good comments being made here, and they all fit into a strategy at the end of the day. And I think that's where we really need to get together and thrash these things out and get some actions associated with the comments we're making, because actions speak louder than words, as we know. And there's some excellent things that have been proposed here. But we need, as a committee, to be, as David says, we've got to push people to make sure that those things happen. And at the end of the day, I would want to see a proper business strategy for Monmouthshire at the end of this exercise. That's our aim, and that's where we need to get to. Thank you.
Councillor Devi, finally. Yep.
Talking about important people who might be living in the county, we've got Mr. Tata Steele living in Chepstow. It would be a really great idea if we made an approach to him. We could perhaps have a business meeting with him to talk about Monmouthshire and how he sees this part of the United Kingdom, if you like, because we've got very close neighbours. How he sees this part of the United Kingdom and the potential of it, and what he sees as the benefits of locating to Monmouthshire. Get a perspective from somebody outside. I mean, we all think it's brilliant. Let somebody else tell us how good or how bad it is, and what we should be doing to attract business people to us. You know, so it's really welcoming. It's sucking in, not all pushing out. You might be selling the wrong message.
We've even got Sporty Spice living up the Wye Valley, I think. So.
Yes, that is true.
We certainly do. Perhaps there's another concert there for Caldecott Castle in the future. Okay, I think...
Is that what you want? What do you really, really
want? I know. You wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it. I think all those comments are certainly welcome. I think we've got a lot of work to do in terms of this next meeting. We'll get this scheduled before the next meeting of this select committee, which is going to be on the 26th of April. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'll speak to Kelly this week. I know she's on leave for a bit next week, so I want to catch her before the Easter recess. And we'll take this forward. We'll get our meeting scheduled in, because there's a lot of goodwill, a lot of good ideas from this committee. And we, as Councillor Devi has said, we just got to keep knocking on the door and demonstrate our worth as a committee and put the good ideas there. And then it's up to the cabinet then to take those ideas forward.
It's surprising, Chairman, how often, after you've been banging away at things for some time, you find somebody who stands in front of you and tells you exactly what you've been talking about.
Yeah.
And I didn't put the microphone on.
Oh, you're forgiven. Final item then, item 10, is the cabinet forward plan. I don't think there's any items there that we need to potentially call in, but obviously just to make you all aware of that plan, and obviously keep looking for that plan every Friday when it's published. And then obviously the next meeting, Thursday, 26th of April, 10 o'clock here. Can I thank everyone for their time and contributions? Thank you.